Hey, this is Paul from Ride Staffs, and this is Velog number 26. We're continuing our series of chats with John Herity about the Rapha Condor years. This week, we're covering off 2008, 2009. 2008, the team become the Men in Black for the first time, and 2009, we mainly focus on the team achieving what was probably their most significant victory. Along the way, we also discuss what is class without a single reference to Karl Marx. Hope you enjoy, and see you at the other end.
Go. So, episode 3, and I guess I think tonight we'll try and cover 2 years: 2008, 2009.
Okay.
2008's the first year that Rapha and Condor are involved. The look of the team changes. Suddenly, the bike sponsor is also, and the kit sponsor are the two of the, in that year, 2/3 of the key kind of funding of the team and where that comes from. And then 2009, because there's a lot kind of changes in British cycling with a small C in 2009 in terms of how the domestic scene looks. And so generally there's that, but also obviously some big specific things that happened for the team in 2009 that we'll come back and revisit. So looking back on 2008 and starting that process, I think at the end of last week we talked about how in sort of August, September, you're starting to sign riders for the team for 2009. How then did that process of bedding in with, I suppose, Condor and Rapha work, and how did things change with the team from your recollections?
In terms of Condor, that was very, very easy. Condor, I had a relationship with Condors beforehand, as we mentioned in the previous episode of this. So Condors was quite easy. Rapha was a little bit more difficult. I'd always had I was always interested in clothing, cycle clothing, and as a rider, I'd always tried to use the best clothing, so I could see what they were doing with their products. The only problem I could foresee is that the sport was changing. It was becoming more and more technical, the fabrics were, and whilst they were using technical fabrics, they were trying to create a brand around the historical sort of connections with the sport from way back, sort of thing, which kind of went a little bit against the way that the sport was changing. It was getting more and more modern. So we had this Sports World jersey in that first year, which was a very it was a new wool that they developed, and the jersey was absolutely out of this world. It was fantastic. The only problem was it was quite heavy, it was quite thick, in terms of if it got wet, it was it obviously went even heavier, given that it was a wool mix. It was still a really, really good product, but the way the sport was changing, it was difficult to try and justify that when you'd sign riders on the basis that the sport was moving forward. It was getting more and more technical with the use of power meters and so on and so forth. Aerodynamics was starting to come into it as well. Not quite so much in those days, in those first years. It was obviously in it, but not as not down to the the fabric of the racing jerseys. It's interesting to see where Rapha eventually went when they teamed up with Sky. But in those first few years, it was literally all about the look, all about the image of the team, and from my point of view, I think that was good. I mean, it was great to have this team that had a very, very strong identity. We got called the Men in Black quite early on, and that kind of moniker stuck for the duration of our time with Rapha, to be honest. So it was a little bit difficult in working with them in terms of trying to get product on time, which is a problem for all cycle clothing manufacturers and cycle teams and cycling clubs in general. I'm sure most people listening to this will have experienced not being able to get their club jerseys on time and things like that. And they were a relatively new company, and some of the the people that we're using to produce their stuff, I was like telling them, just look, you need to tell them we need this 2 weeks before we actually need it, because I will guarantee you, it's not going to come through on time. And if you tell them that, a deadline, they'll go over it. So you need to give a fictitious one 2 weeks earlier than you have to do it. And then remember that once that deadline has passed, you then got to start playing, merry hell with the manufacturer because they've missed the deadline, sort of thing. And that way you'll get your product quicker. And I mean, considering where they are now, it was, that was pretty small fry stuff, to be honest. And in fairness to them, they always managed to get through on time eventually. But it was, good product, but it wasn't sort of cutting edge technically wise in terms for a racing team, if you like, of where we're going. But from an identity, wow, they were, it was out of this world. The way they coordinated together with Condor, and for the whole look of the team was fantastic.
And how about, I'm just kind of looking at some of the riders in the roster for that year. So obviously Dean Downing had been with Rapha Condor the year before they merged with recycling and before your involvement. But then you're bringing Kristian House, Chris Newton to the team, guys who've had a background working on British cycling programs, who are probably used to and starting to, I guess, get into that mindset about kit and how stuff performs. I mean, how did they have a point of view?
Yeah, it wasn't. We weren't quite there. They weren't quite there, so it was okay. And because the product itself was so good, the quality of it could not be faulted. It was such good quality, that they wanted to ride it. And there was at the end of the day, you were also, wearing a product that was much in demand. The stuff was selling out. I mean, when you went on their website in those early days, it was very, very clever the way that they did it. Product sold out very, very quickly, and as a consequence, it became the must-have item, if you like. And it worked very much in the way that a lot of fashion houses work, where a product would be launched and then within days the stuff is sold out, and it creates all this almost like this demand for it.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Hype.
Yeah. Hype for it. Yeah. And we were caught up in that in a good way, in very much. We rode the crest of that, to be honest. And we had a product, and we're wearing a product that everybody wanted. So it was only a very positive thing, to be honest. So it all that kind of smoothed over, if you like, any of the initial sort of reservations against, like, certainly the wool jersey was a problem in those early days. The wool jersey was a black wool jersey in hot weather was hot, surprise sort of thing, despite its wicking properties, and it was the best in its class, so to speak. But as we know now, where the sport has gone, it was still it wasn't as cutting edge as it could have been.
Yeah, got it. And then looking to Condor, I guess, a very traditional brand in terms of, obviously, had existed a lot longer than Rapha. Yeah. What did they bring to the table, and was it, well, where was Condor at in terms of the evolution of their product at that time? And
well, they'd I'm not sure if they'd. I mean, we used the Leggero frame set from them, a carbon fiber frame set. I think that had been already. They'd already launched that, in fairness. But whilst they're a traditional company, they've always been at the cutting edge of the sport for their client base. At the end of the day, one of the problems we had with the team is that a team like ours needed time trial bikes, for example. Condors don't sell time trial bikes. There's no market for them to sell a time trial bike. So they didn't design one. They didn't make one, and as a consequence, that was a problem. But in terms of their road racing frame or a racing frame, they were right at the forefront on it. We were riding what was in effect a hand-built carbon fiber frame. This wasn't a monocoque frame. And to this day, it's still the way that they as a company go. in so much that whilst there are all the standard sizes there, if you did want a hand-built carbon fibre frame from a British company, they're the guys that will do it, sort of thing for you. So they were definitely cutting edge. They were using Italian manufacturers that they invested in a number of years ago. And it kind of went with the Rapha thing as well. In those early days, we're still using Shimano equipment, which when that changed to Campag, Rapha were absolutely made up with it, to be honest, because it kind of tied it all back together again, brought it back into Europe, so to speak. So those after, I forget when it was, probably about 2010, I think it was, we changed to Campag, and that, you know, the look of the team solidified even more with that sort of very much that European sort of look to it. So Condor they were a dream to work with, and still are to this day. They're you know, really, really good people to deal with. And yeah, they know their stuff. They've been, you know, you don't stay around for as long as they do. You know, they have, not knowing what, you know what to do, so to speak.
Yeah. And so how was the dynamic of the team that first year? Because there was a little bit of gelling together of I don't know how many riders, kind of, whether it was just Dean that came on from the original Rapha Condor Club team. But yeah, sort of first year with certainly two different voices with strong opinions, I'm guessing, about every aspect of the team. How did those relationships settle down in that first year in 2008?
In fairness to them, both Rapha and Colin, in fairness to both of them, they pretty much left it to my own devices. The team was very much my, you know, I was in control of it, sort of thing. But the way I did that was you basically, it goes right up until, you know, the last sponsors that we had with JLT, that you need to ask what the sponsor wants out of it, you know. And Rapha had a very, very clear vision of what they wanted from the sport in general, and obviously from the team as well. And so did Condor. But Condor were also open to suggestions in terms of, you know, where I wanted it, you know, what did I think. Rapha were as well, but Rapha had their own vision as well about where the sport would go. And daft as it seems, it's actually where it is now in terms of sort of the gravel bike ride. And they wanted us to do everything in that team in those first few years. They wanted the number of requests that they made for us to do stuff that was a little bit, for the time, quirky. We didn't. You know, I didn't really want to do it. I thought this team should be very much a traditional sort of continental team, and doing basically what the UCI said, you know, a platform for moving riders on. So working with sponsors like Rapha and Condor, and Rapha in particular, who had a vision of why they wanted the team, and what they, you know, it was a marketing tool for them. And they did a good job with it, in fairness, and all credit to them. And to a certain extent, me trying to balance that with the riders and explain to the demands of the sponsor that we have to do these things for the sponsors, you know. And sometimes they end up being, you know, you actually get more out of it as a rider. And that certainly was the case in some of the events that we went to over the years, because Rapha in particular wanted us to race abroad in Asia, in the countries where they had a strong presence. So Japan, Korea, Taiwan, all those three countries, and in particular the capital countries of those countries, the capital cities of those countries, they have very, very strong presence in those towns, cities. And when we went there, we were absolutely, you know, we were feted like the Beatles. Certainly in Korea, the first time we went, it was crazy. You know, that first year we went to Korea, Paul Smith had done a project with Rapha whereby he produced some bags that actually had a picture of the team on them. It was a series of a leather hold all for a computer, not a leather hold, but hold all for a computer, a toilet bag, things like that. And there was like these Korean guys coming up to us wanting us to sign these 300-pound Paul Smith bags, wanting us to like deface them, basically, like writing autographs on them, which we thought was absolutely mad, and they insisted on taking us out for meals and so on, which when you look at EEF, what they're doing now, it's, I just see, well, we did that like 10 years ago. That's what we were doing, the same way that they're now using, the sponsor is actually using the team to connect with its either workforce or its its client base or customers, and they were doing that. They managed to generate a following for that team all over the world, which was phenomenal, to be honest.
So I guess for people that are listening and to sort of plot that evolution, I guess a couple of questions that I wanted to ask. One was like compare and contrast for me, for you as a pro bike rider, what might you have been asked to do for Percy Bilton? What were your requirements over and above pin a number on John, win? What were you asked to do at that time, and how did that?
Zilch. That was it. You didn't do anything. That was all it was. You turned up for a
promotional postcard.
Correct. Turn up for the team launch. Make sure you've had your hair cut for the team pictures, and a shave, if as it was appropriate back in the day, because beards were not part of it. Which, interestingly, that was one of the things I had a bit of a do with Rapha about it, because I am to this day still anti facial hair.
Wasn't there a bike rider in the 80s that got sacked?
I'm pretty sure the Euskaltel team had something written into their contracts that they weren't allowed to have.
I'm thinking like is Urs Frühler or something like somebody, some Swiss rider or something in the 1980s.
He was famous for his moustache. I think he got away with it. He had a moustache at Frühler, so he perhaps got away with it. He'd always have that, and I don't think he had to shave it off. But I was very anti beards. Rapha were very much into it. They definitely loved it, and that one of the riders that eventually rode for us in that first year in 2009, Hank Craven.
I think we might just have answered the question about the conversation that we had prior to recording this, so maybe we'll come back to that next week.
Yeah, fine.
Good stuff.
So we did nothing. We didn't have to, as a team. You did nothing, and to a certain extent, the sponsors and your fan base, certainly when you were riding, were kept as far away from you as possible. I don't mean around starts, still you were encouraged to interact with fans at the start and finish of races and so on like that, but no one ever went riding with you or anything like that. That was a big no. There was always a big, you'll knock a rider off. If you knock a rider off, that's it, sort of thing, So that was a big no. And it's one of the things that Rapha pushed, basically. We'd have to do these team rides with more with their client base than not their suppliers or anything like that, or anything like that. It was purely the client base. The more I think potentially the investors, the original investors that with Rapha, we went to a couple of sort of high-end sort of hotels and went for rides. Not always sure who we were riding with or why we were riding with them, but we did it, and it was interesting to see the way that some characters developed, some riders developed with that as well. And I picked up on that quite quickly, that certain riders that were very, very quiet in a team environment, younger riders in particular, when they got away with these other clients, people from outside of the team, they were actually the better ones, the ones that were quiet within the team, the more timid ones, if you like. When they actually got with clients, they ended up being the better ones for the clients, and they the feedback you got from clients was that, this guy's really, really good. I'm like, was he? He's never said boot or goose. I've never heard him even speak at the dinner table, So, it was interesting. So in terms of helping, some of these younger riders develop as human beings, it was actually really, really, really productive, a really, really good thing. And I grew to like them, to be honest. I thought it was good.
And again, something you touched on there was kind of riders and the different kind of personalities and things. There's always, I guess, in any human group, in the sense that we're all kind of just glorified chimpanzees or apes or whatever. There's always a hierarchy, isn't there?
Mm.
And do you think that's maybe one of the aspects that those situations enabled that kind of a disruption of the normal order of things within a cycling team? The established older riders who maybe come with a reputation and results and things like that, that in a new situation, those things don't count as much.
I just don't. I know. I just think that they were, those younger riders around those older guys, the better riders, they were intimidated by them. And so for me as a manager, that meant that I had to then try and break down that and encourage those riders. So I kind of learned something from it as well. So you take them out of the cycling environment, if you like, even though we were still cycling. And the fact that you saw another side to this individual meant that, hang on a minute, if this guy is being suppressed within the team environment, maybe that is actually affecting his racing as well. So maybe we should try and do something about that, or I should try and do something about that to make it easier for that rider, if needs be. I can't think of any sort of one individual to give you a story about that, but it was certainly there in the back of my mind, thinking about that sort of thing all the time. And group dynamics is a big thing. Sometimes you have to put the big dog down every now and again, just to sort of show to those the younger guys that okay, he kind of might rule the roost as far as you're concerned, but he actually doesn't. He still can be put in his place, so to speak. So it was for me, that was good. I mean, I saw one guy in particular. I won't name names; it's a bit unfair to the rider, but this rider hardly ever spoke at all. I've had two riders like that. This first one hardly ever spoke at all. Was very, very, very timid. But around the Rapha customers in particular, he was far, far better than Kristian House was, Tom Southern was, all your kind of known Dean Downings. He was far, far better than them. I overheard conversations that we were having with those Rapha customers that, he was leading those conversations. He was very, very good indeed. And that came from his social upbringing. He'd actually had a better upbringing than most of the rest of the guys had, sort of thing. So he was actually more comfortable with those guys, to be honest, than if we say the rough and readiness of the rest of the team, sort of thing. So it was a good lesson for me to learn from that, actually.
And so other than that, I guess 2008 from a racing point of view in the UK kind of looks, the British Isles looks very similar to the year before the Tour of Ireland. The RAS is there, the Tour of Ireland was still there at that stage, Tour of Britain's happening. That was the last year that I was working for Tour of Britain, and I think the thing that I noticed about the team from the outside was that we had these guys from this British team, not the team itself, but the sponsors, saying, can we do this? We want to show up and bring our Citroen van to your stage start. Can we do it? What's the, and suddenly not having to accommodate, but just being asked to do stuff that wasn't in the manual, literally or metaphorically. And then this kind of, I think tribe is probably the best way to describe it, that started to show up, that didn't look like the fans of bike races that I'd seen kicking around bike races growing up, and that maybe I'd seen on the 2 prior years of the Tour of Britain. They were dressed differently, they had a different demeanor about them, and what have you. And how was that from your point of view inside the team? How did that change?
But I think by the time we got to the Tour of Britain, we'd had 6 months of this kind of, to get used to this approach where we knew that the client base was going to be around us. So we had certainly, on a day-to-day basis, we had on Tour of Britain in particular, we had guests in the car, virtually every day, either from Rapha or from Condor, we got used to it. I mean, when you went to the Tour of Britain, I explained we spoke earlier a little bit about talking to sponsors and what they wanted from the sport. Well, they can come and say, we want you to win the Tour of Britain. And I could say, yeah, we can do that. And sort of like hoodwink them into thinking, and then explain to them afterwards why we didn't. Yeah, I was like dead straight from day one. That's not going to happen. We are not going to win the Tour of Britain. It's impossible. A team like ours against the opposition that we've had, the best we can hope for is a stage win, maybe win one of the minor classifications. My advice will be to try and get in breakaways and pick that type of rider. And when we select the team, we'll go for that type of rider, the one that is willing to, pull his ring up basically to try and get in that breakaway, and get us some publicity sort of thing. So they went for that as well. They weren't, as I said, I had a good relationship with them, and they believed what I was saying. Whether or not they believed it, as in they believed me beforehand, but it made sense to them, should we say? And that's what we did. So by the time we got to the Tour of Britain, by then we were used to having this following, if you like. We started to grow used to it. I mean, its high point was actually the Smithfield Nocturne. I don't remember the criterium that was in the centre of London. That was like sponsored by Rapha and Condor. Well, man, that was like that was just a Rapha and Condor festival, if you like, with all the crowds there. The majority of people were there shouting for the team or knew about the team, and as a consequence, anyone that had ridden the Smithfield Nocturne knew kind of what to expect. So by the time we got to the Tour of Britain, we knew what to expect, and it was then all about trying to deliver and getting that rider in a breakaway, if you like, and trying to fulfill that aspect of it. But again, I'd made it really, really clear to the sponsors that even then that it's not
done deal.
It's not an exact sciences. If you want guarantees, don't sponsor a sports team of any description whatsoever. Would be my advice. You've got to be and they got that. They wanted to create content and stories around the challenge. Dare I say it, the epicness of it. Yes. And I know that's not a word, but it was all about that. How epic something could be, and making creating stories around the team. And fans, they did that. I think it was good, and everyone bought into it. In that at that time, riders as well. They all bought into it.
So that's, I guess, feels like a good place to leave 2008. I was just going to quickly take a look at where are we? A quick look at Pro Cycling Stats 2009. Stuff changes in 2009. I'm just quickly looking down the team roster. Yeah, Dan Craven, Matt Cronshaw, Liam Holohan, Kristian House, an Australian rider called Darren Lapthorne, Reece Lloyd, Chris Newton, Simon Richardson, Tom Southam. So we've suddenly got this thing that up until that point had been a bit of a rarity in the UK, really. I mean, foreign riders, not really kind of, not traditionally part of the mix in a big way, but this became something that, and I'm sure we'll move on to this in 2010, changed. But yeah, what's the story behind, well, I guess one interesting one probably to touch on is Tom coming and joining the team. Just because of the, I suppose, irony, or whatever. I don't know if it is the correct use of the term irony, but he'd featured earlier in the story, but not as a member of the team, and then like where did the conversation begin? Because he'd had a couple years or a year or two out of the sport, and then come back with Halford in the UK.
Correct. Yeah.
Where did you pick up the story? What happened?
Well, Tom had moved to Australia. He was out in Australia, and I'd always stayed in contact with him, and we never ever fell out over that incident at all. So, we never touched on it before, but Tom was like one of the under 23s that I'd looked at after when I was on the program as well. And funny enough, I've just moved house, and I found some paperwork of which I had done an interview with Tom Sutton when he first came to join the academy. And I'd put down some points, my points of what was brought up in the interviews, sort of thing, and they still ring pretty true now. I have to say, I'll have to dig them out for you if you want to, if we get any questions going forward. But he was, I've always liked him. I'd always liked him. I thought he was, I've always gone for that sort of. Quirky's not the right word for it, but the ones that they challenge authority, but not in an aggressive way. Yeah. They're likable characters, and they don't want to fit into mainstream society, and yet they're here in a sport that is steeped in history and has kind of unwritten rules as well. And yeah, he fell foul of those, and I as was collateral damage, and him falling foul for that as well. But I never fell out with him. Always liked him, and he was an easy choice. Once he'd made the decision to come back racing again. Bizarrely, Dave Brailsford phoned me before he signed for Halfords, because that Halfords setup was through British Cycling. Yes. And Dave Brailsford actually phoned me to ask if I thought Tom would be a good choice to go back to the team. So that, the irony of it all, just like, it's kind of, it's quite funny, looking back on it all now, sort of thing. So Tom was easy. He'd been racing in Australia, and that's where Darren Lapthorne came in. Darren Lapthorne was a former Australian national champion. He'd won the national championships, I think, riding for Drapac. And then Darren had, unfortunately, his family had a really, really bad incident within the family, a death within the family, which affected them all really, really badly. And Darren stopped racing completely. And it was Tom that brought him back into the sport and basically said, look, you need to sign this rider. He's not raced for God knows how many months. Believe me, he's a class act. Come and ride. Get him, sign him. If you're signing me, sign him, sort of thing. And that's how we signed our first Aussie. Now, to sign an Aussie for me was not that big a deal. Basically, we'd now the Tour Series, and the Tour Series was, Aussie riders know how to ride criteriums. I mean, the Americans have a lot of criteriums as well, but they're just not the same as ours. So the Aussie riders are by far the best, or the closest, if you like, to they ride closest types of circuits that we have here in the UK, these tighter circuits. So they're used to it. So if you saw a result from an Aussie winning a few criteriums over there, then the rough and tumble of it, is very, very similar to ours. So it wasn't a massive leap of faith. And in the case of Darren, I would say he was probably the classiest bike rider that I've ever had on a team. Basically, certainly on a since the recycling days, since the Continental teams. Darren Lapthorne probably was the classiest rider that I'd ever worked with, to be honest.
What does that mean in practical terms? I mean, because I had the pleasure, the opportunity to come on a couple of training camps with you guys, and you can see obviously why a bike rider is a professional and you're not. There's just something about the way they move on a bike, the way that they look like they're made to be on a bike. But what then in amongst that class of people sets someone apart, and other than results, because obviously, like you say, Lappers, he had his Australian National Championship, and he had little moments like the Tour de Beauce, I think, and things like that. But you wouldn't look at it as just as his results and go, class. So what makes him? What is classiness, John?
Well, I think you hit it right on the head. You said it in the very first couple of seconds of what you were saying. Basically, it's the way they look on a bike. Basically, it's as simple as that. The way that they move on a bike, they're at one with the bike straight away. That's the class of it. You then couple that with their racing head, if you like, their ability to win races. So you see plenty of riders that are classy, that have got the numbers, if you like, if you want to go modern now. There's plenty of riders that can churn the numbers out, but none of them can actually, have got the racing brain. Darren had both. Darren had he had the racing brain, and he also had that, look on a bike. He looked classy. He never looks like he was. It was an effort, if you see what I mean. He always looked as though he was never in pain. There was actually his nickname was Lappers, and someone once said, "Where's Lappers? What's Lappers doing?" And someone just went, "He's smouldering." Basically, which if you ever look up pictures of him, he's a Richard Gere type lookalike. So he was quiet. Very.
I've got a photo of him from Tour of Japan 2010 with a deer lying at his feet. A live deer, I hasten to add.
Okay, yeah, smouldering. We kind of summed him up, basically. What's he doing? He's over there, he's quiet over there. He's just smouldering, So, Darren, he was the classiest. Good rider criterium as well. He was a top guy. I really like working with Darren, and that was thanks to Tom Southern. Tom Southern basically got him to start racing again, which was good. It was good for him. It was also good for the team as well. We got a quality rider. We gave an opportunity to somebody that for him to get another pro contract, having not ridden for a few months like he hadn't. He basically retired. And so, it was good. We kind of resurrected his career, and he carried on for a few more years.
Cool. And lots of other broader change, I suppose, on the scene in the UK. Tour Series being a big thing, which I guess in the first instance, one thing to ask, kind of how did that change the scene here in the UK for the teams and for the sponsors and things like that? But also then the other side of it is, how did it change? Because suddenly on Tuesdays and Thursdays through most of May, you've got to be somewhere in the UK. So you're not doing a stage race somewhere in Europe, for example. So what did that do to?
Well, again, it goes back to what we said right at the beginning. You need to sit down with your sponsor and work out what's best for you. Do you want us to do the Stories? We have to do the Tour Series, obviously, because if we don't do it, we don't get into the Tour of Britain. Both events were run by Sweet Spot. Sweet Spot being the organisers of the Tour of Britain. So if you didn't ride the Tour of Britain, the Tour Series, you're not going to get in the Tour of Britain. Simple as that. So we had to do that. It was how much emphasis with the team do you want us to put on that? And I remember after I think we may have won. We either won the first or the second round, and we took the jerseys. And I remember Rapha saying, "We don't want you to be racing in the leaders' jerseys. Please, could you not win the series overall? Could you, or could you just win it on the last night? Is it possible for you to sort of orchestrate it so that you?" I said, I wish we were that good that we could actually stay in second place in close contention and then just win it on the last night. So that was an interesting one with Rapha, that they were so focused on that, on that image of the men in black. They didn't want us to be in the leaders' jerseys. Basically, that kind of detracted away from the team. Which, funnily enough, had also happened to me as a rider back in way back in 1981, 82, I think it was. Yeah, when I won the National Pro Road Race Championships. When I got back to France, technically, my team didn't want me to be riding in the national team in the national jersey. It hadn't been seen in France for a number of years. The bands, that's of course has all changed now, but back then, so it wasn't the first time I'd have a sponsor that said, well, actually don't really want you to be riding that jersey, so that was interesting, trying to say to them, well, that's just how it is, we're going to have to, if we're leading, we've got to wear the jersey, as simple as that. So yeah, you speak to the sponsor and find out what you wanted, what they wanted from you. I can sign riders that are capable of getting in breakaways and potentially winning a stage of the Tour of Britain and do all the other stage racing we're doing. And they will do okay in the Tour Series, or I can do it the other way around, get Tour Series riders that can also do okay in the Tour of Britain and the stage races we're doing. And we kind of went halfway house, I think, in that first year. We got riders that could do both, with probably a little bit more emphasis on their ability to do stage races and that. But it certainly changed the dynamic of the sport here in the UK for sure. The Tour Series brought in, it brought in more sponsors, as simple as that. Rapha and Condor were already in it; they were part of the cycle trade. So, but in terms of bringing in, outside sponsors from outside of the sport, the television time that we were getting,
and it was ITV4. Apart from you look at it a year prior to that, and you've got some Premier Calendar on Eurosport, and the viewing figures for those were variable, to say the least.
Yeah.
And then this big thing of the Tour of Britain on ITV4 at the end of the year, but suddenly this was, and the Tour of Britain was great, but at the same time,
this is for British teams
with Pro Tour teams that are going to be hogging the limelight.
Yeah, it was for us. It was set up for the British teams, and you have to give Sweet Spot credit for that, in terms of trying to give a boost to the pro side of the sport here in the in the UK. Basically, it was all about us. It was all about the British teams. We don't think we ever had any foreigners riding, apart from the ones that were obviously in their respective teams, and it was set up for us and our sponsors. And there's no question it could be argued it blew the sport apart eventually, to be honest, actually, as the success of that series got it got bigger and bigger, then demands of riders went up, and the transfers in between teams was created, which is good for the sport. It's certainly good for the riders, good for the sport in terms of the coverage it's getting is more and more, and then there's a little bit of intrigue during the winter months, whereby is this rider moving from one team to the other and so on. So in that respect, it was good. But if we concentrate on those early days, it kind of it created a situation where I for one had to sort of say, look, guys, what do you want to do? Do you want to win the Tour Series? And they weren't overly keen, believe it or not. They were more keen on us winning individual rounds, and if we could win the overall at the end, great. But we're not really that interested in you winning the first round and keeping the jersey from start to finish, sort of thing. But bike riders, at the end of the day, and we all want to win. So that was a difficult one to manage in a way, because there were too many variables in a criterium. Well, in all road racing, but in criteriums in particular, it's quite difficult. Also, the way, I think in the first few rounds, it was the first few years of the Silver Series, it was your first three riders that counted. So trying to work out where your third guy was quite interesting. If that, to be able to sort of orchestrate not taking the jersey one night because you didn't want to take the jersey I wouldn't say it was impossible. It was nigh on impossible to do that.
Cool. So I think the other, in terms of 2009, and as I say, we were kind of starting to, I suggested that tonight we look to try and wrap it up at the end of 2009. It's that, it seems like the end of the first phase of the Men in Black, as it were. 2009, one huge thing happened, and that was that Kristian House won the National Road Race Championships, which that was just before we got on the call, looking back at the at the top 10 of that bike race, and it goes Kristian House, Daniel Lloyd, Peter Kennack, Chris Froome, Roger Hammond, Mark Cavendish for the top 6. I mean, that looks like a massive giant killing act.
Well, yeah, there's no question it was, and it's the beauty of our sport, isn't it? At the end of the day, that it's all the cliches. You got to be in it to win it, and all that sort of thing. Any rider in a road race, given a certain set of circumstances, just about anybody in that field can win the race. It could well be that everyone falls off, and the guy that was like, a reserve that signed on, sort of thing, he might win something. But I'm joking apart. I mean, we're not talking. We had good riders, but we were up against, certainly, Team Sky were obviously there, but they were still in their development phase, I think, and there was still some, I wouldn't say infighting, that would be wrong, but they weren't gelling as a team.
I was going to say, would that have been, because Bradley would have been at Garmin, Wiggins would have been at Garmin, and so is this maybe the year before?
David Miller.
Was this maybe the year before Team Sky, though, or did they come in and...
No, actually, you're probably right, actually, thinking about it. Yeah. Who was Peter down to ride for there? Who was he riding for? He was
in the 100%
mid. Yeah, the 23 team, wasn't he? Yeah.
And Froome was at Barlow World.
Yeah. So it was actually before Sky, yeah. So...
But nonetheless, like I say...
We got in just before before it all kicked off. Yeah. Well, interestingly, Kristian wasn't our protected rider that year. Tom Southern was. And Kristian's job was to cover the early moves, and that's what he did. And basically, I won't go as far as to say he cruised round all day, but he was he got in the early move and basically did as little as possible. That was that was his brief, basically. Get in the early move, make the effort to get in it, but once you get there, do as much as the bloke that's doing the least, is a phrase that was often used in quite a few of our team meetings. So he got in a move, and in success, when it kept splitting, he kept moving with the next group. Tom eventually I don't think Tom ever got up to him, actually. And as I say, Kristian ended up with that elite group at the finish. In Abergavenny it was, and I remember thinking, oh, I just want a medal, please, let's let him have a medal for for this group. I think there was 4 of them in the end that were sprinting. There was Dan, Peter, Chris Froome, and there was somebody else as well. I think it was sorry.
Froome, Kennack, Lloyd, and House were the 4.
Yeah, 4, and I was just thinking, please don't be the guy that finishes 4th. And he was like, Kristian was kind of not he wasn't the best sprinter by any means. He wasn't the worst either, but he had a habit of like making the wrong mistakes tactically, especially in a sprint situation. And I was just like, please don't be 4th, a medal. That's what we want. Just want a medal, please. Like, whatever you want. And I don't know if people presume people know that in the race car you've got the race radio, and you've got pretty much a commentary from the commissaire in the finale. They're all pretty much the same the world over. They all get excited, the commissaires in the finale, and actually start commentating. Most of them do it, to be honest. But about 100 meters to go, they always stop because they don't want to give away. If there's been a mistake in that finale or something's happened, they don't want to say somebody's won and then have to come back from it. So basically, you get this situation where there's this like running commentary going on, and then it stops 100 meters to go, and it's
I guess they disappear off down the deviation on some occasions.
Well, we still hear it though. That's the only thing. So, and that's like the most annoying thing as a manager that it is. And I remember. Hugh Porter was on the microphone, and he was on the PA system. And Abergavenny, the organizer of that is, is really good organizer, puts a great event on, and the PA system is always spot on there. And it was a very narrow, the finishing straight in Argaveni, and but the PA system was perfect, but the windows are up. So I'm listening to the race radio, and it's like the sprint starting, and then it all goes quiet, and it's like, what the hell's happening? And I wound the window down to listen to Hugh Porter on the PA system. So I'm actually listening to the result on the PA system, and I'm thinking, please get a medal. And lo and behold, he goes and wins it, sort of thing, which is like, and can't describe how I was. I was pretty, I was quite emotional, actually. I was, I couldn't believe it. I think I had William Fotheringham in the car with me as well, the journalist and author. And so it was, a very, very special day. And it will have, hopefully it's been deleted now, but I remember phoning both Grant and Simon Mottram, Grant from Condor and Sam Mottram from Rapha, to let them know that you've got the national champion, and basically almost blubbing it down the phone to them onto an answering phone, because neither of them picked up. And you've got the national champion, lads. You've got the national champion, and like put the phone down, and then thought, oh god, that was a bit pathetic, John. But it was an emotional day, very much so. And I mean, Rapha absolutely loved it, as did Condor as well. But for Rapha in particular, it was the vision that they'd had to put this team together and put me in charge of it, to hopefully for something like this to happen, and it did. And it was okay. It was it wasn't unusual. Kristian deserved to win it. He was good enough on the day to win it by far, and given his track record subsequently, everyone knows what a class bike rider he was. So he was a very deserved winner on the day. And I think, was it the height of the team? You possibly could say it was, to be honest. Yeah, to have a national champion against that sort of competition was quite special. So yeah, it was good. And then for Rapha, it was like, again, dream come true. It meant they could design another jersey and try and again reinvent the national champs jersey, which went back into to British cycling, because our rules and regulations of what you can and can't have on a national champions jersey. And it was it was good. It was a very, very special day indeed.
And was that, I was about to say turning point, which kind of implies that there'd been something negative up to that point, which I don't, that's not what I mean. But did that change the nature of your relationship with Rapha and Condor?
Yeah, I think it did a little bit. Yeah, there certainly was no negativity. You're right in the way that you're trying to explain it, but from my point of view, they suddenly thought, actually, maybe this guy does know what he's doing. So I'm sure it kind of it justified what my philosophies, and they weren't my philosophies that I sort of foisted upon them. It was a joint. It was an inclusive sort of decision-making process in the way that we did it. I did, a little bit of table banging with it to sort of say, well, let's be clear on what you want here. Write it down and use someone minute this exactly what you want, because it's very easy to come back in 6 months' time and say, oh, you didn't do this, you didn't do that. So I'm always very clear on that with sponsors that. We mark stuff down, and we did it. Basically, it was something that we kind of dreamed of. Is it possible? Yes, it's possible. Can we win the national championship? Yeah, given a certain set of circumstances, we can. But I'm not saying that we're gonna, we're definitely going to win it or even get on the podium. Not with the class of field and the way the sport is going. Now with the number of riders like the Froomes, the Geraint Thomases, and the Bradleys and so on. It was like the sport was getting bigger. So yeah, it was great. Yeah, it was a good day.
Which I guess is probably a good place to wrap it up for this episode.
Okay. It is.
Maybe touch on There's obviously Tour of Britain and things like that come out after that in 2009. But I think Kristian on top step of the podium at the national championships is probably a fitting moment to bring this episode to a conclusion, and we can pick up the story next time.
Okay, cool. All right, good stuff.
So there you have it. That's where we'll wrap it up for this week, with the team standing on the top step of the British Cycling National Men's Road Race podium. Some of the biggest names in British cycling, past and still to become some of the biggest names, defeated on that day. Quite a giant killing act. It really changed the perception of the team, and marked the start of something that would become quite an iconic part of the history of British road racing. So next week we'll pick the story up with the remainder of 2009 Tour of Britain and where the team goes from there.